This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
So some people live vicariously through others, and then some other ones live curiously by expectations, whether they're expectations they put for themselves or they're false expectations related based on an idea or some preconceived idea or something they heard. And so a lot of that relates to business and personal, and I'll walk through some of that. But the problem is that some of the expectations could be real or false, and sometimes we don't know. Real experiences could be, obviously, and I'm being hypothetical, do not follow my instructions with this, but everyone knows that if you jump off a bridge to a ravine, that they know what the results are fatal. We don't need to see this. We don't need to perform it or act through it. That's real, right? And many things are like that. But other things, we have to see it for ourselves to believe it. And one example is when electric cars became a little bit more mainstream, we just had to see it, right? Our friends would go over their house. We had to sit in it. We even maybe even took it for a test spin to say, like, wow, this is actually real, like from a sci-fi movie or something. Scuba diving is much of the same way as well. Some people just cannot grasp this concept of breathing underwater, even while trying it and seeing others do it, right? So there is the, and of course I'm not getting into like psychology here, but there's that act of actually seeing it, trying it, and then seeing others, it validates many of those points. One time in a class, I had a husband and wife as students. There was a big group, but I'm just going to talk about this husband and wife. He was like a kid in the store. He showed up early. He was the earliest person there. I don't even know what time they showed up. It had to be at least, it could have been 2 hours before the class started, that he was so excited, like a kid in a candy store, just going all around. You could just see the excitement. At the exact same time, the wife was walking around, and you could totally tell she was shooken up. She's nervous. She has no idea what she's expecting. And she actually seemed that she already told him no many times, and he's pushing the issue. And so it was clear that she was just being dragged through this whole process just so he could get the experience of it. So we get through the classroom, go through the orientation. She warms up a little bit. His excitement just start going through the roof. We get out to the pool, and you could just tell he can't contain his excitement. We get in the water, and we had to break up the class. So I ended up staying with the husband and wife and working with them. And we had another instructor in the water, a scuba instructor, and so they were working with the balance of the class so that this couple didn't hold them up. And so we tried to get them. We were standing in 3 feet of water. It's not a whole lot. All we're trying to do is get our heads underwater. We're just squatting down. And they have a wall right next to them, and he held onto the wall a lot. But what was amazing is we spent about 90 minutes going through this process, and during that time frame, she fell in love with it. She was smiling ear to ear. She was just enjoying. She couldn't believe how wonderful the experience, breathing underwater, and how much fun it was. But for him, he couldn't get it through his head that he could actually breathe underwater. It was like the moment we were trying to go underwater, you could tell he was fighting it, and his mind just goes into panic mode. Every time we just try to break the surface. And again, like most of the time, his head's still sticking out of the water. It's not like we were actually completely submerged. We're just trying to get him comfortable along his face, his ears, just the fact of just breathing bubbles underwater. And again, we were in standing water, and his hand was on the edge of the pool. He could pull himself up whenever he wanted, which could be part of the issue where he had a comfort zone and then he kept utilizing it. It's like with kids, sometimes you take away the distraction is no longer a distraction. But in this case, I didn't do any changes for safety reasons because he was already, being a handful in general, and I'm not saying that negatively, but he was just having some issues, and we were working through it. But this is not normal for people when they try scuba. They could have high anxiety. there's a lot of spouses that get dragged through it and then ends up all working out fine. And most of the time it does. I would say the ratio is quite high that everything's just fine. This is abnormal. They actually asked for a refund of the class. He couldn't do it, but she loved every moment of it. She couldn't wait to do it again. And what happens when we do scuba, especially when you try scuba or it's the first day of the class, you just start in this 3 foot of water situation and just start with putting your head underwater just to get bubbles past you. Eventually you'll kneel and your head's completely submerged, but it's only submerged by an inch or two. And then eventually we sit on a ledge or work our way a little bit deeper. But again, you're not really getting any deeper than 4 or 5 feet. And we usually bring toys. So there's this thing called torpedo. It's like a torpedo underwater, and you kind of play catch. It actually teaches them a little bit about how the differences between land and underwater, because the vision's different. Things appear bigger and closer, and they're really not. So they miss a lot of the catches, but it makes it fun and people are having fun. So that's usually the process. But on another thing, when we talk about perceive ideas or people having ideas out there, and obviously they're trying to give advice on a lot of things. But one of the things I'm going to share some personal experience. But on a regular basis, I have four kids, let alone I have 4 boys. I've heard it all. The oh my's, your poor wife. It's never a dull moment, on and on, right? Yeah, and all, it is what it is, right? And it's a false belief or expectations because they cannot experience that, right? And maybe they don't want to, but they're not actually in it. Try to prove me wrong, right? So go ask a mother of 4 kids or 5 or 6 or 10, whatever it is, let alone, 4 boys or even 4 girls for the same genders, specifically depending on the number of kids. And I bet almost any amount of money that mother is going to say they love every moment with those kids, right? They'll never say, come back and say, I wish this never happened. Maybe it has occurred, but again, there's moments, but overall, they're not going to say that. And some might say, well, she is the mother. Of course, she's going to say that. And that's true, but I think people are just misled by these preconceived notions of what the expectations are or are supposed to be, right? So the reality of 4 or 5 or even 10 kids, it's really a bundle, right? It's not a lot when you're living in the moment and it's part of your life. And it's only a lot when you compare 2 or 3 kids, right? So, but that you could compare that in business too. Like you could have a certain number of employees, you could have a certain amount of revenue, you could have a certain number of product lines, all this stuff, right? But it's also a reality if you and your spouse ended up with 5 or 6 kids by the act of God for whatever reason, you would also love, if it happened to you, you would also love each and every one of them and each and every moment that's there, right? Even me personally, like I can honestly say that I never asked for 4 kids, right? But I wouldn't trade it for the world. And even to this day, my wife would love to have more kids, right? And because of this, I would probably go back to my younger self and tell the younger couple to just start sooner and close the gap between the kids, right? So my first and second kid are 3 years apart. My second and third kid are 2 years, and third and fourth are 18 months apart. And those 2 are probably the closest. They're 2 peas in a pod. Even though all of them get along and they play games, they also all fight too. But what do you expect for boys? And just from my perspective, when I hear somebody have 4 or 5 or even 10 kids, I instantly think, wow, what a blessing. It's incredible, or it's inspiring, that you could care and love for every one of those kids. It would actually really be awesome. I'm not saying I would ask for more kids, but I'm just saying that I think it's an awesome experience to go through. And it would be for you as well if you could walk through those shoes, because it's not like you jump one day into 10 kids, but even if that was the case, you'd figure it out. Most don't raise their kids hating all the chaos, right? Sure, there are moments when there's hardship, there's disappointment, there's grief, there's anger, right? But somehow you figure it out and you keep moving along. And it's, again, same thing in business and other aspects of life. You embrace the chaos in one way or the other, right? You don't really have a choice to get through life. And even if you had no kids or abundant of kids, you would still have to have some element of embrace of chaos, right? You got coworkers, you got traffic, you got inflation, you have other things that make an impact. So if we compare this to small business that's only making $50,000 a year in annual sales, or if we compare that to $50 million in their annual sales, there's some element of chaos across the board no matter what, right? Sure, is the $50,000 annual revenue business doing better than or feel like they're doing better than having all the chaos at 50 million? Maybe, but it's just different, right? And so it's not saying that one is worse than the other. They both have their challenges. You kind of pick your challenge, and it's essentially what it is. And it's like literally a marathon when you're growing, and it's a lot of setbacks along the way, a lot of discomforts, but you also have a lot of success, and we'll get to that too. But some people don't want to embrace the chaos, and some do. Like for me, I'd say just pour it on, right? Try to paint a picture for you. So you can imagine a cup of water that you're trying to fill from a faucet, and you just let it fill up until it overflows over the lid. Sure, you're going to lose some water from the overflow, but at least my glass is full. And that fullness could vary from person to person, but that's okay. We all start and finish where we're at, right? It's not really a race against others. It's a race against our own challenges. So some people in life never fill their cup, though, and that's okay if they prefer that, and to each their own. But others, you get further in life when that cup is overflowing. Sure, this could be about money, but it could also be, and this is where most of it comes from, is the experiences, the character, the love, the faith, the confidence, the connections, right? The list goes on. It's not necessarily, even in business, the amount of money that you end up getting as you grow. It's definitely the character building, the experiences, the hardships, the successes, the love for the game, the faith you get and the confidence you get as you move along, not only in your own abilities, but the people that you surround yourself with. And then the connections along the way. And even in my case, I've been fortunate, knock on wood, to continue to keep growing. And yes, some of the problems I've had when we were smaller have either minimized or completely eliminated, and we trade those for newer problems. But as I grew, the connections got bigger, and that is important, almost as important as the character and experience building. There's things that we could have conversations with smaller companies in my industry, and you could have that conversation and you could almost hear the words you used to say back when you were about similar size, experience, whatever it might be. But again, with preconceived notions, that's really what it comes down to, is that sometimes you can make judgments, factors on one way or the other. But when you start providing some of that advice without the experience, you're trying to convince somebody else that it's either a good idea or not a good idea when you've never walked the walk yourself to get to that position. I hear this all the time, especially as I've grown, where a lot of smaller shops, I feel like sometimes they pull me down versus pushing up, or they're given experience and they've never even been there themselves. So one example is offering, suggesting that, hey, you should get the software, but they never purchased it themselves. It's just harder to give that kind of advice. Yeah, and even just another example, since we brought up kids, I can't tell you how many times that people have said along the way when we were had younger kids and we were adding to the family that you should just stop having kids, right? I'm thinking, how rude is that, right? And so it's not a decision for somebody else to make either. And in business, we hear people say that all the time, right? They tell us we shouldn't do certain things, or you shouldn't invest in certain areas, or you're not ready to hire that first assistant, or you're not ready to do whatever it might be. The list goes on, and people are listening to this have been in the same boat. It comes down to just naysayers. Some people are just given opinions based on their concerns for others. It could be based on the experiences they haven't had, and they're trying to pass them on to you on what they believe or don't believe is right for your situation, right? Another way we personally deal with this is we homeschool our kids. We always have. I would joke that we did it before it was cool, and there was an increase of homeschoolers since COVID, and I think that's awesome. And there's so many different reasons to do this, and some people obviously are against it, and for so many different ways and reasons. And the naysayers just come out all the time. The biggest one is how do your kids, really get to socialize, and you don't get the high school experience. I've heard that one, right? Like, it's a big fat false, right? And so most of the time when people say this, they don't have any friends or family with homeschooling experiences, or if they do, it's very, very short-lived, a year or two, and usually it's because it's challenging. The parents give up, the kids fight, and it's better off just sending them to school for the other babysitter to deal with it instead of you as a parent. And I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I think it's what you and your family need to decide. That's why, not to be political during COVID, I really think the government shouldn't have decided who goes to school and who doesn't. I think it should have been the parents. And so whatever the parents decides is going to be best for them, that's their situation. But you shouldn't pass any of those preconceived notions onto somebody else. In fact, when it comes to socialization, most of the time that homeschoolers are more outgoing and meet up new people more often than the ones that don't. And I'm not trying to compare like on a scoreboard. I'm just saying it's a moot point. So there's people in a public school that meet people on a regular basis and have no issues. There's also people in public school that are shy and introvert and don't meet other people. And then sometimes that creates other issues too in a big school environment, but you have it on both sides, right? So there are introverts and quiet and shyness and homeschoolers too. But again, it's a false preconception, and we're trying to pass on the views to other people. And I think that is where we have problems in business. And even though we talk a lot about benefits plan, there's a lot of preconceived notions when it comes to renewals, right? The expectations of what it should be and shouldn't be, what carrier you should really have, what's the right thing to do based on historical events or what other people are saying. Because it's very easy to point the finger if things don't go your way right away when you start making some changes. But at the same time, that just the same thing with raising multiple kids is that sometimes you just have to stick out the game and work it and adapt to it. And then all of a sudden you have great kids, loyal kids. They're honorable, they work hard, and they're smart, and they stayed at school and they went to college, and you're very proud of them at the end. It's the same thing in benefits when you're doing the renewal, as well as just business concepts in general. What I've learned so far in business to relate all of this is that we always have challenges, setbacks, no matter what level of business that you're actually in. And this is personal life too, right? And you kind of learn and adapt as you move along. And then when you look back, on a side note, that Steve Jobs gave a talk at one of the universities, I think it was on the West Coast, I don't know specifically which school. He gave a speech, motivational speech, as they always bring in speakers, and he talked about his time in college, and he dropped out, and he started going to all these classes unannounced to the ones that he wanted. And so he just talks about that experience and how that translates to building the first Apple computer. But my whole point of this is sometimes you just keep moving forward, and then when you look back, it starts to make sense. And you made progress, and you're at a different level, even though at the time you had no idea why you were doing it. But along the way, even though you have these setbacks, you also have success. There will be times you could take a deep breath and enjoy the work you do. And a great example is this. Most men, and I'm sure women do too, not to separate them, but we cut our lawns on the weekend, we do some landscaping, and we probably sit there with a glass of water or even a beer, and we stare at our hard work, and it could be for the next hour, right? And so sometimes in business, we've had that success, and we're looking back, and you're like, I can't believe that just happened. All that hard work went in there, and it actually paid off. And so it's definitely on both sides, the chaos and the success. The same with raising kids, especially for boys. But with all that in mind, like even in my own case, like I'm not operating the business the same way I had even 10 years ago, right? I've had to change along the way. I had to adapt. I had to bring different tools in. I had to bring software. I had to make new connections. I had to hire new people. I had to change people. Like the list goes on. We tried different things that didn't work. We spent thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars on things that didn't pan out. I'm not the same business professional that I was 10 years ago. And so things have changed, the conversations have changed, the connections have changed, the network of people have changed, the character and experiences have changed, which allows me to look at things in a different light. The same is true with having more kids, right? We adapt, we change our surroundings, we move away from the naysayers, whether it's physically or just avoiding them. We are clearly, I'm speaking for myself, are different parents today with 4 boys than we were when we had 1 3-year-old adventurer. But even as business or professional people that are listening to this podcast, we have false expectations. We have even of our own selves. We can never make $100,000 in this business. It doesn't work for my industry. It doesn't work for my situation, yet other people have. I cannot move past barriers that are in my industry without resources beyond my means. I've heard that many times, yet other people have. I've grown past it. We've had tons of setbacks. The Affordable Care Act was a huge setback for us personally, as well as the industry. But and then along the way, you get outside influences. I always call it gravity in business, right? So there's this business gravity that just keeps holding you down no matter what. It always sets you back, and it's the perseverance that keeps moving forward. But there's all these preconceived notions even of ourselves, because we're not forging ahead. We're using these outside influence. You're listening to other people, and it creates barriers and restrictions in the marketplace that prevent you from growing. Your preconceived ideas in business or even personal life of yours or somebody else is limiting a factor for not only your success but others, right? And so I don't think it's our intentions to hold back others or even ourselves, but that's what we end up doing. We end up sabotaging ourselves. To kind of hammer this home a little bit, is there's a movie out there by Pixar, Cars, right? So we got Lightning McQueen, right? So specifically in Cars 3, probably the worst one they did as far as box office numbers. But if anybody's ever watched it, you could relate because it's about him getting old. But anyhow, so he runs across this Cruz Ramirez, and there's a chain of events that occurs to get there. But eventually they have a crossroad and they get in this huge argument. And watch the movie, you'll get more details on that. But my whole point of this is Cruz asked Lightning McQueen, how did you know that you were going to be a race car? And McQueen's response was, I never knew I couldn't be one. And Cruz wanted to be a race car driver, but people kept telling her that, she should dream smaller. It's not going to happen. You don't want to fall to disappointment, all this stuff. It sounds like the same thing that we all go through, whether we're a solopreneur, we run a 100 employee or 1,000 life or employee company. And then when she had her one shot, she didn't take it, right? So she kept pushing on, and then that one time occurred, and she didn't move forward. We do that in business all day long, right? We claim we're moving forward, but are we, right? So she was talking about Cruz in this segment. They were talking about she got up early, she did small races, she was working out, whatever it might be, doing all these little things. And when it came down to it, she listened to the naysayers that prevented her from success. So one of the takeaways from this, I want you to take take some notes with you, is your own ideas and experience are not the same as others. In fact, if you are given the advice or input that you don't have experience for, please refrain from giving that advice. You could only do more harm than good. But the opposite is you should focus on is maybe focusing on more positive things in that conversation, or try different things to help each other out. And so to give you another personal story, I have four hockey players, right? And that's a tough task, not only as parents, but financially all the way through. And it's not easy. And most hockey playing parents or hockey parents will never experience that level. They just won't. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying it's just never at that level. I do get the advice, negative advice that says that they couldn't do that if they had more than one kid, or like they bring all this nonsense to the table all the time. And I heard it all, right? And instead of being positive, but Some get it though, right? So I have parents that they don't do it all the time. They're good people, right? So they'll buy me a hot chocolate at the ice rink because they know I'm going to be there for 2 to 4 hours longer than they ever will and on that given day. And there's times where I'm at an ice rink for 4 hours, literally. And so some will do it. They don't do it all the time, and I don't ask them for it. But it's just that little generosity that because they can't relate, but they're there to help out, right? And so I've even had some that actually purchased a sandwich for me because they knew I was there for a while, and somehow they picked up I didn't eat. Not that I can't afford my own lunch, but again, they're trying to help the cause. They understand that they can't relate to the situation, but they're trying to they're trying to be the good people in the world out there. It's not advice, but they're supporting, and so that pays off in the long run, and it obviously creates more character and relationships and connections along the way, just on a personal note. And even if money's not even involved, like, I am super grateful for the parents that grab one of my kids for car rides to move them from one rink to another rink to save us that trip, or maybe we can't do it. It's just a logistics thing. We've had some cases where we couldn't show up to the game, and in order for the kid to be there, we've asked the parent to go pick them up, and there's tons of parents that are more than willing to do it. So there's no financial money involved in that. It's just pure generosity to assist other parents that have multiple kids, right? The same goes in business. Before giving advice, right, and you don't have experience, maybe offer to help pro bono, right? And maybe in some cases you might have to charge, but you could discuss that later. But lead with your best foot forward, right? So you're going to learn from them in the process. So, like, I always tell, like, some of the cohorts that I'm part of and some other relations, like even though they're smaller, I'm willing to help them. Sure, I'm in a different spot than they are, but at the same time, they're helping me. Like, I'll call them and say, hey, I need some help on this. Can you help me out? Hey, can I bounce an idea off of you just to get your feedback? Some of it's just for connection and relationship building, sure, but they may say something that triggers another thought, and that is rewarding all the way through, right? And so you're going to help yourself succeed by helping others, by not giving your preconceived notions and experiences that you really actually don't have to give.